France and Egypt say a ceasefire in Gaza is possible, and Israel and Hamas aren't rejecting the idea. Can the Sarkozy-Mubarak proposal work? Can the plan be upgraded to a binding Security Council resolution? And can Hamas surrender its grip on Gaza after such losses and deaths? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the show. I'm David Foster. Top Egyptian diplomats have been meeting an Israeli delegation in Cairo to discuss a ceasefire in Gaza, while separate talks are to be held with the Palestinian Authority as well as with Hamas. On Tuesday, Egypt and France proposed a plan to end the war on Gaza. The plan has won immediate backing from the United Nations, Europe and also the US. It calls for an immediate and temporary truce between Israel and Hamas to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza and to allow time to broker a more lasting ceasefire. It also seeks a complete arms embargo on Hamas, calling for a halt in arms smuggling. In return, both Egypt and Israel will open border crossings to Gaza. The truce doesn't talk about a permanent lifting of the siege, and this is why it draws a lot of criticism from the Palestinian side. Arab analysts say the proposal doesn't treat Hamas as a representative of the Palestinian people. Instead, it seems to suggest that the group will cease to govern Gaza and simply ignores it. Well, not surprisingly, Hamas officials have said the truce favours Israel, while Israel says it won't discuss opening the border crossings. However, Israel has also said it views the initiative positively and will consider it. Joining us now, our guest from Jerusalem, Nickolay Mladenov, Bulgarian member of the European Parliament and its delegation for relations with Israel. In Damascus, Richard Burden, a member of the UK Parliament and chair of the Britain-Palestine All Party Group. And in London, Abdel Bari Atwan, editor-in-chief of the Arabic newspaper Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Thanks very much to all three of you. Let me start with you, Bari Atwan. I know you don't think the Sarkozy-Mubarak plan is really workable. What do you think its shortcomings are?
Well, actually, first, Hamas doesn't trust Egypt as honest broker. Hamas was stung before by the Egyptian mediation when Egypt promised something and actually ignore Hamas demands to extend the truce to the West Bank and also to open the Rafah border crossing. So Hamas actually was deceived by the Egyptian mediation when they signed the truce for 6 months, and they don't want to repeat the same experience again. This is one thing. Second thing, this Egyptian initiative, the Egyptian Sarkozy initiative, actually asking for a ceasefire and make Hamas equal to the Israelis. And it is not Hamas who actually attacking the Israelis now. It is the Israeli who are attacking Hamas, attacking the Palestinian population in Gaza. It is one-way war against Hamas and against Gaza. The third important element is, it is very vague peace initiative. They are talking about reconciliation after that. It is a temporary one. It is not permanent. So Hamas actually feel that they are going to be trapped again. So they prefer the Turkish peace initiative, or the Turkish, actually, which was brokered by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish Prime Minister, and they feel that the Egyptian and Sarkozy, they hijacked this Turkish plan and they presented their own in order to actually deceive Hamas. So
I'd like to go into the details of the
between
Turkish
Hamas
plan
and Egypt
in a little while, but I'd like to ask at this point, Richard Burden, that even with those shortcomings, given the fact that people are only talking about a ceasefire before any kind of long-term agreement, would it be in Hamas's interest to accept even a flawed plan if it ends the bloodshed?
I think we need to stay focused on what the first priority has got to be, and that has got to be to bring the killing to an end. When you have had such an onslaught on Gaza, such carnage in Gaza, over 700 people killed and 3,000 injured, all of our first priority has got to be to bring the bloodshed to an end. And I'm, in a sense, less concerned about where the initiatives come from as whether or not they're effective. And if we can bring the bloodshed to an end, of course, all sorts of other things for the ceasefire to be sustainable have got to flow from that. But I hope neither side in this conflict carries on playing with the lives of the people in Gaza, because what is going on there is an outrage, it's a crime, and it's got to stop.
Mr. Mladenov, you're part of this Friends of Israel group from the European Parliament. in talking to your contacts in Israel, and I know you've been down to have a look at Sderot, where some of the rockets have been falling, in your conversations with those people, do you think they are determined to come out of this with a ceasefire that puts them in a much stronger position than they were before hostilities started?
I think everyone that we've spoken to is absolutely determined to make sure that there is no return to the situation before this latest outbreak of violence happened, and that situation being absolutely unattainable. I don't think any democratic country in the world can allow its citizens to be constantly shelled by rockets. But let me say that I think it would be very counterproductive right now to get into discussion of whose proposal should be discussed. I think they all converge on two very important things. Firstly, that there is a need to cease the violence in Gaza, and secondly, there's a need to stop the rocket attacks on Israel. And the way to address that is obviously by also tackling the issue of smuggling weapons into Gaza, which is a very serious part of the Egyptian proposal, because Egypt is also threatened by the developments of Hamas in Gaza. And in that sense, I think it's quite encouraging what we've heard today, given that both the Israelis and the Egyptians are moving ahead with negotiations on that proposal. And I think we should all come around and support this idea, because it does pave the way for ending the violence, albeit temporary, and puts in place a process which can deliver a longer-lasting settlement.
But the problem will not go away, will it? The major grievances in the short term, if Bari Atwan, if the proposal makes no mention of lifting the siege, even though Israel says it has withdrawn from Gaza, it effectively controls Gaza.
Yeah, personally, I believe it doesn't need a peace initiative. What it needs, the Israeli to stop their carnage against Gaza. You know, they are bombing Gaza from the sea, from the air, from the ground. So if the Israeli are willing to stop this kind of war, there will be a ceasefire and there will be negotiation after that. Hamas will stop launching their primitive missiles against the Israelis.
Sure, but the point, and I'm trying to get down to specifics here if we can. Yeah. The point is that Israel will not agree to a ceasefire unless some of its conditions are met. One of which, for example, is that perhaps there's an international force on the Egyptian side of the border to make sure that no more arms are smuggled through those tunnels into Gaza. Israel is not just going to say, OK, we're going to stop.
Yeah, but it means Israel is going to impose its terms on Hamas by military means, which they failed to impose it by imposing a blockade against Gaza and starving 1.5 million people. It is not acceptable. This is not the way to create peace. This is not a way to actually to go forward and try to solve this problem.
But Richard, it is a way, no matter what Bari Atwan says, it is a way to impose your will to get what you want, and that's what Israel is after, surely.
Well, it's been completely counterproductive from Israel's point of view. Anybody that's been watching the TV screens over the last 2 weeks knows the carnage that's taking place in Gaza. It's not stopped the rockets, and I want to see the rockets from Gaza into southern Israel stop as much as anybody. But Israel's attack simply is not working. What it is doing is alienating the rest of the world from Israel, and it's inflicting mass death and destruction on a civilian population in one of the most crowded places on earth. That's why Israel, I think, does need to be told very firmly by the international community that its attacks have got to stop. Yes, indeed, I think the rocket attacks from Gaza into southern Israel need to stop too. We need a ceasefire on both sides. But the way out of this is to lift the siege on Gaza. For nearly 2 years now, you have had 1.5 million people, as I say, on one of the most crowded places on earth, living in a kind of open prison. And without any kind of normal trade life or anything like that, and with humanitarian supplies being drip-fed. Now, if we want to see peace in this region, and that for me means 2 states for 2 people, a viable state of Palestine and a secure Israel, this has got to change, and the siege of Gaza has got to be lifted. But the first thing to get to that is to have a ceasefire and to have it now.
Mr. Mladenov, I know, as I mentioned earlier on in the programme, that you've been to Sderot, which has seen a number of rockets fired upon it from Gaza. Have you ever been to Gaza? Do you know what it's like in there?
I have not been to Gaza. I've been to Sderot a number of times. Today was actually quite an interesting experience because as we were entering,
can you imagine what it's like inside what Richard Burden described as an open prison, which I think is a sort of it doesn't characterize it properly.
I've spent a large part of 2006. I spent a large part of 2006 in Iraq and a number of very dangerous places, and I can imagine, and I have absolute sympathy for the people who live there. But let me also not lose sight of the fact that it has been thousands of rockets that have been fired from Gaza into Israel. And we're not talking about primitive rockets. We're actually talking about rockets that are reaching further and further inland that were manufactured, obviously, outside of Gaza. We're not talking about just cigarette smuggling or goods. We're talking about weapon smuggling. And we're talking about Hamas, which has rejected the two-state solution. It has rejected the peace plan. And we are faced with a very, very difficult situation in which, yes, there are 1.5 million people there that are starving and are facing extremely difficult conditions. But let us not forget that part of the reason why they're facing these conditions is the regime that Hamas has put on them. This morning, I met a young Palestinian soldier whose legs had been shot off. He's a Fatah, a Palestinian Authority soldier, and he was part of a group of 70 people who were put up against the wall and shot in the legs by Hamas when Hamas took over in Gaza. Now, this is let us also remember these facts.
I am going to stop you here, not because I don't think you're making a valid point, but we are trying to discuss, you know, the particulars of any kind of deal that may come around at the moment. And that's what I'd like to return to after we've taken a short break. When we come back, we'll be asking whether deploying international troops could be part of the solution or part of a problem. Stay with us if you will.